It's the week of April 15th, 2019, and you're listening to the Missouri GrowingPoint Agronomy podcast. I'm your co-host, Pioneer Field Agronomist Jaime Farmer, and with me again are my counterparts for the Missouri Pioneer team, Nick Monnig and Scott Dickey. Welcome back to the show, fellas.
Sure.
Thanks, Jamie.
Big topic this week for us is, the question of how far behind are we? What are some of the things we need to consider as we continue to try to get this 2019 corn crop in the ground? A lot of times we're thinking about being behind, it seems like, but if you think in terms of tillage, fertilizer, how much nitrogen got put on, then yes, you would be correct in thinking that we're behind in that regard. But when it comes to planting, we're really not that far behind if you look at some of our historical planting completion percentages. If you think back to 2013, almost all that corn was planted there in the middle of May, and we still had some very respectable yields. So Mother Nature really hasn't helped us out too much this season as far as getting field work done. We look here at the month of April, and we've had some pretty big swings there in regards to temperature and some cold rains that have happened there right after some warm flushes. So what are some of the concerns there, Nick, when it comes to determining, maybe when and when not to go to the field to plant?
Yeah, Jamie, one big thing obviously is temperature and forecast and weather moving in. And we've done some work around cold stress emergence on corn. And I guess one of the things that sticks in my head from some of that work that we've done is you really need a minimum of 24 hours on that seed before you get that cold, chilling rain event to come in. So you really want to look at the forecast, and if something's coming within that 24 hours, you really want to shut it down. But it's even better yet if you can get 48 hours. It gives that seed a much better chance to go ahead and emerge and come up uniformly. And especially you factor in the case that things are a little wet this year compared to the last couple of years, and we're going to be pushing it. So no need to push it on temperatures as well.
That's a good comment. It's the biggest concern there is just don't want that corn to have its first drink being a real cold one. Another thing there, Scott, we were talking about, whether we're behind or how things look as far as planting go. What are some of the things, consequences, I guess, for folks who jump the ball a little bit or rush too quickly to get in the field and the field's not fit for planting? What are some of the consequences for that?
Yeah, Jamie, some of the fields we look at this year, on top it looks like it's in pretty good shape, but as you dig down, it's a little wet. And when we're planting into soils that are plenty wet, we run into some issues potentially with planter concerns related to sidewall compaction and potentially open furrows. And all of this will lead to poor uniformity of emergence, issues with standability potentially, and other related issues tied to sidewall compaction. And then with the open furrows, we run into problems when we have heavy rain events. The heavy rain events would allow the cool rain to immediately get into the seed zone, resulting in chilling injury and other issues like that.
And so, Scott, thinking about what that penalty would be from a yield impact, what would that look like as far as uniformity being off, some of the research that we've seen there?
Pioneer's done some research on that, and what they found is that due to uniformity of emergence alone or lack thereof, we can see up to a 5 to 9% impact on final yields.
So that right there just seems like a pretty significant impact, and you're talking about tight commodity prices and economics on this whole venture, and going out there and just getting a little ahead of ourselves, thinking that we're behind, looking at the calendar date and seeing that kind of impact. Another thing, Nick, we've seen a lot of gas going on here this spring. Just a quick reminder on some of the concerns when it comes to NH3. I know we didn't get much on last fall, so there's a lot of rush to get that on right now. So what are we looking at with those scenarios?
Yeah, Jamie, just several things to keep in mind. Obviously, as we narrow down in a year like this, the interval between planting and hydrous applications, things can get a little bit tough. So a few things to remember. A lot of people want to ask, what's the minimum number of days I need to wait between planting and hydrous application? There is no magic number. I always say if you can get 5 to 7 days on it, that's great. We're going to get pushed probably a little bit more than that. Well, the big thing to remember, though, is that depth of application is really more important even than the number of days that you wait. So 8 inches or more this time of year is ideal. Always, when you go to put it on, to be sure we're putting it on an angle, or if you have RTK and you can just split that row so it's 15 inches off, that's an ideal way to do it. I will say I'm not naive enough to not know that custom applicators are going to be getting pushed. And with some of these high-speed bars, like John Deere bars, they're going to be running faster, and they're not going to be able to put it on as deep, so you need to be mindful of that. You really need to be trying to push for that 8 inches or more, but that's not going to happen in every single case. And so if we get we're only putting it on, say, 5 inches deep, it expands 3 inches, that puts it at a 2-inch depth right in that seed zone where we can dehydrate that seed. So that's not a good thing whatsoever. The other thing just to remember is that usually we talk about anhydrous burn in drier years. In a wet year, we can see it. I've seen it before where we slab that stuff on too wet. We put the anhydrous on too wet. It runs back up that sidewall. So it is important to make sure that stuff's sealing and going on correctly. And just, I guess the last thing I'll mention too, sometimes we see in a year like this, the field cultivator chasing the anhydrous applicator. That may not be the best of idea. That conversion can happen relatively quickly if things are right, but you probably don't want to be right behind it and opening that field back up that just got applied with the field cultivator and letting that stuff move back up before it's converted. The other thing I'd mention, if you're worried about a problem, one thing you can do, you can reduce the amount of that nitrogen you put on his hydrous pre-plant, and you can put a little bit more into his sidedress application to kind of reduce that load and reduce potential burn.
Yeah, excellent point there as far as the concerns with anhydrous, some of the things you can do to maybe change that program this year to avoid some of the risk. Definitely got some concern out there in the field, just need to be smart about that. So just quick reminder there, we may seem like we're behind, but if you look at historical planting completions, we're still on track to have a successful season. Just need to make sure that the field's fit for planting. We don't want to rush things too much. As Scott mentioned there, we've got some concerns out there in the field that could definitely cost you on the back end if you just get in too big of a hurry. One of the other concerns we have with the lack of field work that was able to get done is a lot of the winter annuals have gotten ahead of us. If you look across the countryside as you're driving through Missouri, there's a lot of fields out there that are a real mess with winter annual growth, getting pretty woolly out there. So some of the guys that were forward thinking were able to get out there and get that sprayed are going to be set up when it comes time to plant that crop in the field. But also, for those of you that are even the conventional till side of things, might think about at least just a quick application of even just glyphosate or something out there to kind of get a handle on some of those. If those get too woolly, then you start to run into issues with the tillage equipment that you're going to use and possibly have to increase the number of tillage passes you're going to make in that field and then start running into some seed bed concerns. So with that in mind, Nick, we're just thinking about controlling some of these winter annuals. So what are some of the key takeaways just to keep in mind for 2019?
Yeah, one of the things I just want to mention is that if you're a no-tiller out there, gotten this question a few times the last couple of weeks, people want to put 2,4-D in the sprayer tank and spray that and then go plant the corn. It's just important to remember, always read your herbicide labels, but most 2,4-D labels say if you're going to use a pint of a 4-pound per gallon product, which is a pretty common rate for most people, it requires a 7-day wait time, just like soybeans when you're planting corn. So ensure that you're using that interval if you're going to use 2,4-D in that tank mix.
Yeah, that's a great comment right there. A lot of folks that are spraying chemicals out there in the field that have never read the labels, so just a real quick glance at plant back restrictions could help you avoid some disasters here this spring. And then just the last thing there, we've got a lot of woolly cover out there, cover crops, and a lot of these winter annuals. So what are some of the insect concerns, Scott, that we might want to watch out for?
One thing that we've really been trying to keep an eye on is black cutworm moths, and we've been seeing increasing numbers in the flights around some of the states around us. And even when I've been out mowing the yard the last couple of days, notice a lot of moths coming out of my grass that I haven't identified yet, but they look like they very well could be black cutworm moths. So that'd be something definitely to keep an eye on, especially if you're in a situation where you've not applied a secondary insecticide with your pre-herbicides.
Yeah, that's something that we definitely have to keep an eye on every year is just some of those insect concerns, especially where we have plenty of green cover for them to lay up in and lay eggs. One of the other thoughts here, just kind of wrap up on is just a touch on soybeans for a little bit here. So with as much gas that needed to be put on this spring, we have several folks that have somebody running gas on and at the same time they're running their soybean planter. So with some early soybean planting, there's just a few things to keep in mind as far as the big three for us would be sudden death syndrome, insect and disease pathogens to keep an eye on, and then population as well. So Scott, I just want to touch on those first two there, just kind of the key points on SDS and insect and disease concerns.
Only time we plant soybeans into a cool, wet environment, especially early on in the season, like we're seeing some beans actually going in this week, we want to make sure we're putting a levo on those soybeans because that'll help protect us from diseases like sudden death syndrome better than anything out there. As far as other insects and diseases go, the longer it takes for a plant to emerge, the more risk we have due to the time that those plants remain underground. allows more infection time for the diseases as well as for time for insects underground to chew on them. So utilizing something like our Lumigen seed treatment really helps reduce some of those concerns for us.
Yeah, that's a good point. Seed treatment with the quality concerns this spring. Definitely need to make sure that we're implementing all the tools available to us to help protect that yield. I guess the last thing there, Nick, we've touched on it in the past, but just kind of some population considerations when it comes to early soybean planting.
Yeah, population is definitely a hot, debatable topic when you're talking with people about it. When it comes to early planting, I mean, one thing you have to realize is that you're going to put those soybeans into more stressful condition, most likely, which means you're going to be able to get less plants emerge. So just something to think about. You want a rough rule of thumb. A conservative way of thinking would be to get 140,000 plants emerged would be a good conservative spot to be at. You could get by with a little less potentially, but that's a good conservative number to use. That means if I'm planting early, I can't plant 140,000 and expect 140,000. Means I probably need to bump that rate up a little bit. The other thing you have to factor in, be sure that you check the germination percentage of the seed that you're getting this year. You know, all the quality concerns that you had when you were delivering seed to the elevator this fall, same quality concerns that we had with soybeans. So germination percentages might be a little bit down. So, Jamie, I guess if I were thinking about it, you know, whatever my normal number is, I might bump that up 10% just from early planting stress. But assuming I'm also calculating and factor in any lower germination percentage I might have.
That's a good rule of thumb right there, is to definitely make sure you just keep an eye on what your germination percentage is, as that can change from seed lots and different varieties and then from year to year. And then also just to be able to only go out there and plant those soybeans once. You know, that's the goal. We don't want to have to go back out there in that field because we were too short to begin with. So definitely some key things to keep in mind there when it comes to sudden death. Some of the insect and disease concerns, as well as the population. You know, looking forward to getting a lot more of this crop into the ground. I guess one final thing here, while we've got some time just to touch on, is cover crop termination. So if you've got that mad cereal rye out there that's starting to finally get some height to it, and your goal is to terminate it before you plant those soybeans, now's the time to be able to get that accomplished and be able to get that killed off and still be able to get those beans in the ground in a timely fashion. So obviously, if your goal is to plant green into that cover crop, you know, you're still set up for success there, that you don't need to do anything with it. But if your goal is to terminate, now's the time to do it so you don't end up with a mess when you're ready to get out there and plant that crop. So with that in mind, again, we just wanted to mention a couple of podcasts. If you're looking for a little bit more in depth on some of the topics we covered today. Last year we covered deciding when to go to the field, knowing when the field's fit for planting, and then also a pretty good podcast on early soybean planting from spring of 2018. Nick, it's always important for folks to know where to find us. If they can't find us in the field, where should they look?
You can find the podcast at podcast.pioneer.com. You can find me on Twitter at Nick Monnig.
And I'm at the Jaime Farmer.
I'm at Dickey Scott.
So with that, we thank you for your time. We thank you for your business. Again, you can always reach out to your local Pioneer sales professional for additional information. Sign up for those timely agronomic updates into your inbox. And so again, we thank you for your time. We thank you for your business. And we look forward to speaking with you again.